Chapter 18. When they arrived back at the Croft, the winter had taken the snowscape into its iron-hard grip. The world was tightening as the freeze set in, and Connor went off hunting, leaving Heather and Ramirez to feed the stock and start a fire. The Croft had been built adjacent to an ancient fortification, a dry stone keep to which an older race of Scots had retreated when the Roman legionaries had chased them out of their valleys. It was an unstable erection, but still reasonably windproof, and useful for stabling the stock in poor weather. It had no doubt seen more dramatic times, had heard the clash of weapons without and within its crumbling walls, had received its share of battle scars, and seen men die within its confines. Now the old stonework harboured spiders and bats, was a refuge from the cold, and hardy plants found anchors for their roots in its cracks and crevices. It was a gloomy place, with a spiral stone staircase to the watchtower above, and narrow window slits. Heather did not like to spend time in there alone, as its ghosts worried her. So Ramirez helped her lay some straw on the earth floor and start a fire to drive out the winter that had crept in through its many orifices. Heather was a little troubled by the secrets the men appeared to be keeping, and she was determined to find out what was going on from Ramirez while Connor was away. She knew that her man had been deliberately sought out by the Spaniard, and while she was prepared to let things lie for a while, she had reached the point where she was concerned for their lives together. She was afraid that Ramirez had come to take him away. If that was so, she wanted to know why, so that she could fight to keep him on equal terms. This Ramirez had a magnetism for Connor which went beyond normal friendship. Besides, they were not truly friends. That was not their reason for being together in the first place. They may have become so now, but that was an accident, not a design. She wanted to know the design. What scheme, what plan had been responsible for Ramirez coming all this way to see her man? She was stirring some stew over the fire in the tower, not wishing to waste good fuel on merely warming the place where the stock were kept. Ramirez sat, honing his sword nearby. "Why was Connor so quiet today, on the return journey?" she asked. Ramirez looked up. "I don't know." "You didn't say anything to him? Have you upset him in some way?" "I said many things to him, any of which may have got under his skin. You know how sensitive he is." "But nothing specific?" she insisted. "Nothing you wish to tell me?" Ramirez stopped honing the blade and stood up. He went to her and put his arm around her shoulders. Heather felt the pressure of his hand, but it was gentle, reassuring, nothing else. She continued to stir the pot, staring down into the mess of stew. It was coming. He was going to tell her something terrible, or he would not be acting in this way. He would be joking, like he always did when he teased her. Her heart began to beat faster. "Oh God, please, nothing terrible. I do not want to lose my Connor now. If he's murdered, we'll pay together, Lord. If he's sick, I'll lay myself down by his side and we'll die together. Only let it be together. Please, dear God, let it be together." "I told him to leave you, Heather." She wanted to scream, but instead she said, very calmly, "Can you tell me why?" It may be hard to understand. I don't care. I want to know. Her hands were trembling violently now, and she had difficulty in continuing her domestic activity. She wanted to hit the Spaniard with the fire iron, kill him so that he could not take her Connor away from her. Heather, he and I are very special men. We're freaks of nature. The fact is, we cannot die, not in the ordinary way. We will grow no older than we are now, and Connor will live several 100 years. If he's careful. I asked him to leave you because I know what it's going to be like for him, watching you grow old and die, while he stays young and healthy. I've been through it myself. I wanted to save you both the pain. Are you bewitched, the pair of you? Her mind was busy, thinking through what she had been told. She was a simple country girl, not uninfluenced by her pagan forebears, and ready to accept that there were things in life that were not readily explained. That there was a dark side to nature that visited itself on the light every now and then. She was a Christian, but heathen teachings were slow to die in that part of the world. Ramirez shrugged. Who knows? I haven't enough knowledge to make a judgment on that, though it's my opinion that it's just a quirk of nature, not something that's been put upon us deliberately, by some wizard or demon, or even God. It just happens, the way some people catch warts and others do not. And Connor, he agrees with you about going. Ramirez stroked her auburn hair with a strong, calloused hand. Sadly, no, my dear Heather. He refuses to leave you. Instead of a quick, sharp parting, which both of you would have gotten over fairly quickly, you will have the slow pain of living together, yet knowing you cannot die together. Although the thought of this upset her, Heather much preferred it to a parting. She said as much, and Ramirez nodded. It's what I would expect you to say. Who wants to do now what can be put off until later, especially when the later is a lifetime away? I can't blame you. I'm sad for you, but I can't blame you. You know he can't father children? She adjusted to this idea very quickly, it being less terrible than the thought of Connor going. I'll never mention it to him again. Ramirez raised his eyebrows. He said you wouldn't like it. I don't. I wanted children, desperately, but I wanted them to be Connor's too. It was for the both of us that I wanted them. He can't have them. She shrugged. We'll have to do without. Some people have greater trials than that to put up with, and they stay together. Ramirez nodded. I admire you both. Don't, said Heather. We're just selfish, that's all. Love makes one selfish. Inside, she was more unhappy than she liked to admit, but she had a strong spirit. She was a MacDonald, and her clan did not lie down when obstacles put themselves in the way. They found a way around or over them. She said, What happened in Glenfinnan? Ramirez replied, The villagers found out that he was an immortal. They wanted to burn him. And the priest stopped them. She went instinctively for the most logical explanation. No. The priest had difficulty in sorting out his pagan beliefs from his Christian teachings. He would have stood by, no doubt in great anguish, and let it happen. It's good that it didn't. For him, too. He would have spent the rest of his life in remorse, convinced that he was going to hell. And so he should do, she said, incensed. Don't be too hard on the man. It's not an easy concept to accept. Christian people lay down and die when they are mortally wounded. To him, the devil was at work. Heather cried. So that's why Connor gets so moody when I talk about his having the devil in him. Oh, I didn't know. Oh, my poor Connor. She paused. And you have been in love too? Several times, my sweet. He laughed. Once, I had to try and rescue a lady from one of my own kind, one who wanted to take my life away. We can be killed by each other, but I'm not going to tell you how. It must have been very dangerous for you. Well, I was very much in love with her, my dear Heather. She was the only thing on my mind, not the danger. So, holding a rose between my teeth and with my sword in my belt, I scaled the 40-foot-high walls of a stronghold, then lowered myself down from the roof with a rope to swing in through her open window. That's so romantic. Ramirez laughed. Unfortunately, the lady was no longer there. What did you do? I introduced myself to the lady that was there. She was most helpful. We got on famously. He suddenly seemed to have a thought. Would you like some wine? I have some in my saddlebag. It'll be frozen through. Then we'll warm it and have it mulled. He went outside, and she could hear his boots crackling in the snow. She was glad now that she knew the worst. It was not an easy thing to live with, but it was not as bad as she had feared. She had thought that perhaps the man Connor had said he had wounded when he first came to the Croft had died, and that they would come and take him away to hang him. The wounded man was obviously just a story, because Connor had been afraid of what kind of reception an envoy from the devil might get. He had been right, too. Her father would have turned the young man away. Instead, they had come to treat each other with the utmost respect, and her father had not been an easy man to like. Ramirez was back with the wine, but he was looking concerned. What's the matter? She asked. Ramirez kicked the snow off his boots. I don't know. His brow was furrowed. I think, but it's no use guessing. Perhaps I'm wrong. I just have a bad feeling. She was alarmed. Connor? No, I don't think so. My great age, for I'm over 2,000 years old, my dear, has given me instincts, but has not improved their reasons. Perhaps it's nothing. Let's drink the wine. Up in the tower, the doves that nested there suddenly took flight in a flurry of wings. Both Ramirez and Heather looked up anxiously. Perhaps a wild beast, she said. Perhaps. Suddenly, Ramirez whirled and stared at the door. He drew his sword. Heather, get out! Run! What's the matter? Before he could reply, there was a sound of splintering wood, and a huge sword blade appeared in the rotten timbers of the doorway. The blows were repeated, and the door shattered beneath them. Heather screamed. In the light of the opening, contrasting sharply with the white snow beyond, stood a giant of a man, dressed all in black. He was smiling. She scrambled to her feet and ran into the corner of the tower. Ramirez stood his ground. For a few moments, all that could be heard was the spitting of the peat on the fire and the bubbling of the stew. The wine had fallen from the Spaniard's grasp, and the container had broken, spilling the contents over the straw, turning it scarlet. "Kurgan," said Ramirez, almost matter-of-factly. "I should have trusted my instincts, or should I say, my sense of smell." The Kurgan laughed. "Always the slick-tongued insult, eh, Ramirez? Perhaps I should cut that tongue away from your body, from the neck up. You've tried before, and failed." "That's true, but I'm here now to try again. This time, I have the feeling that you won't be so lucky." "It's not so much a matter of luck as skill." "I am stronger this time," said the Kurgan. Ramirez sniffed. "So I've noticed. An Italian cheese would have difficulty in keeping up with you. Perhaps you rot faster, from the heart outwards." As he was speaking, the Kurgan sprang forward to shatter a bench with his sword. But Ramirez was faster and had jumped to the foot of the spiral staircase. "The Highlander," grunted the Kurgan. "Where is he?" "You are too late. I've prepared him for you." "You waste your time." "I think not." They crossed swords then, and the fight began. Heather crouched down in the corner, avoiding the blows that whistled past her head. She was terrified. Who was this monster? What did he want with her Connor? Suddenly, the Kurgan reeled backwards, clutching his throat. Blood spurted through his fingers and came gushing from his mouth. He spat globules of it into Ramirez's face. When he took his hand away for a second, Heather could see that the Spaniard's sword had sliced deeply into the giant's neck. If she did not believe in immortals before, she did now. That stroke would have felled an ordinary man. Ramirez said, "Almost, Kurgan. You are losing your head." The Kurgan's voice came through in a kind of bubbling croak. "No, Ramirez. That was your only chance. It's your head that will roll across the floor." The swords met again, with the Kurgan gargling out some strange language that Heather could not understand. The fireplace was destroyed as the blades crashed down on the brickwork. Hot stew spilled out over the earthen floor, and a sheep sank to its knees when the Kurgan's sword sliced through one of its hind legs. It bleated pitifully for some time, until a second blow, meant for Ramirez, split its skull. The rest of the animals scuttled here and there, some trying to scale the walls of the tower, and others running out through the open doorway. As the fight continued, a sleeting blizzard began outside and added to the confusion, the wind driving the wet snow through the doorway and filling the tower with swirling flakes. Ramirez, to gain the advantage of height, leaped onto the stone steps leading to the watchtower, and the Kurgan gradually forced him upwards, fighting past the windows through which the sleet was funneled. The visibility in the room had dropped with the storm, and Heather could only dimly perceive the actions of the two men as they battled on the stairs. She saw Ramirez kick out, and his foot landed on the throat of the Kurgan. The big man grunted, obviously in pain. "Hurts, does it?" cried Ramirez, with satisfaction in his voice, and kicked again. They were fighting about 20 feet from the ground at this time, and the Kurgan overbalanced and fell crashing to the floor in a crumpled heap. He lay still. Thank the Lord for that, thought Heather. She hoped every bone in his body was broken and that he would not even be able to lift a finger. Her hopes were short-lived. The Kurgan stirred even as she was thinking and was back on his feet before Ramirez could reach the bottom of the stone staircase. "You cannot win," gurgled the Kurgan, holding his throat. "I am the strongest." Ramirez cried, "My cut has improved your voice. You warble, my friend. Not exactly like the sweetest bird, but definitely an improvement." "Still jesting," growled the Kurgan. "I have lived too long to be serious." "You have lived too long," confirmed the Kurgan. The great man swung his sword, and it struck the masonry at the foot of the steps with tremendous force. The crumbling brickwork, already loose and lacking any adhesive mortar, began to give way. Blocks of stone tumbled from the walls and began thundering around Heather's head. She screamed, pressing herself into the corner. "Run, Heather!" cried Ramirez, in between parries. "Get out of here! Run! Run!" The Kurgan went berserk, his sword strokes smashing into the walls of the tower, the metal ringing out, sparks erupting. Each wild stroke brought down more masonry. The whole tower was now in danger of falling, with loose stones slipping out from underneath all the time. Blocks the size of a man's chest rolled down the staircase or fell into the snow outside. The sky opened up to the two fighters, and the blizzard joined in their furious battle, itself lashing and whipping as the swords bit into one another. Heather could see the dark clouds moving above the heads of the two fighters that now fought on the very pinnacle of the staircase, the walls around them having dropped away and leaving them open to the raging elements. Suddenly, one of Ramirez's lunges broke through the Kurgan's guard, and the Spaniard buried his blade in the giant's stomach. The Kurgan screamed, but gripped the samurai blade in his strong left hand and held it there. Another block of stone fell close to Heather. She screamed just as the Kurgan wrenched the sword out of his own body and threw it to the ground. "Ah," he said. "Hurts." Then he looked down to where the scream had come from. "Who is the woman?" "She's mine," said the now unarmed Ramirez. "Not for much longer." The Kurgan's sword lashed out, and a deep cut appeared on Ramirez's chest. "You try some pain," said the Kurgan. Ramirez stood quite still. Heather could not see his face, but she realized that he could not escape. He was trapped. Lightning came out of the clouds and stuck the stonework between the two men. They seemed to absorb it, as if it were nothing but gentle sunshine. "Tonight you sleep in hell," said the Kurgan. "There can be only one." The sword flashed again, and something fell beside Heather. At first she thought it was another stone, with a grass clump growing from it. Then she saw the eyes staring at her blindly, and screamed. It was the head of Ramirez. His hair was black against the snow that had covered the floor in a thin layer, and the stump of the neck was still twitching. She vomited violently. The Kurgan began to descend the staircase, slowly at first, but then more quickly when she jumped to her feet and stumbled over the fallen blocks to get to the door. She ran towards a group of distant pines as lightning began crashing down onto the ruined tower and impeding the Kurgan's progress. She stopped and looked back, thinking that the bolts must surely destroy the man. But though he paused each time he was struck, he still continued to follow her. He seemed invulnerable to the charges, even gathering in strength each time he was hit. God was surely on her side, trying to stop this beast from reaching her. But his efforts were not forceful enough. The monster came on. She struggled through the thick snow, still trying to escape, and thought she might make the trees, where she could disappear into the darkness beyond. But a rough hand gripped her shoulder and threw her to the ground. "Hello, pretty," growled the Kurgan. She screamed, and he dragged her back to the tower. Once within the walls, he picked up Ramirez's head and held it in front of her face. "There's your lover," he said. "Why don't you make love to him?" She tried to claw at the Kurgan's face, but he merely laughed. "Oh, I forgot. He hasn't got his body with him. You'll have to make do with me. I'm better than he is anyway." He tore her dress open to the bare skin and threw her on the ground, where she shivered. "Now," he said, getting on top of her, "a small price for Ramirez." His stinking breath made her retch, and she lay there as the animal grunted, forcing himself inside her. There was great pain, both physical and mental. All she wanted was for him to finish and leave, before Connor returned. When Connor came back from the hunt, he found Heather sitting beside Ramirez's body. She had placed the head at the top of the torso, but Connor could see that they were separate bodily parts. "What happened?" he cried, throwing down the carcass of the young deer. He took her into his arms. "Are you all right, my Bonnie? Are you hurt?" She shook her head and clung to him tightly. "No, Connor, I'm no hurt. I hid in the woods. But Ramirez is dead." "Aye," he said. "I can see. It was a big man, in black. Ramirez called him the Kurgan. He fought like a madman. I thought it was the very devil himself. Is he, Connor? Is he the devil?" He hugged her to him. "He may as well be. Thank God you're safe." "I ran when the fighting started. He looked for me afterwards, but I was well hidden. Now he's gone, thank God." Connor's mouth tightened. "He killed my friend. One day I'll make him eat his own weapon for that. If he'd harmed you." "But he didn't," she said quickly. "It's as well, for I would have chased him to the ends of the earth." They buried Ramirez in an unmarked grave beneath the floor of the tower the next day. The earth was hard, but not iron tough like the ground on the outside. Heather said a prayer over the spot and privately cursed the Kurgan for what he had done to the Spaniard and to her. Now she was glad for what Ramirez had told her, that these immortal men could not father children. While he had been out hunting, Connor had thought quite seriously about what Ramirez had told him of his own experiences. But whenever he considered leaving Heather, his heart sank. Eventually, he made the decision that, as long as she needed him, he would stay with her. The Kurgan never returned to the southern uplands of Scotland, and Connor and Heather lived a peaceful life, if full of privation, in their Croft. Over the years, Connor watched his Heather grow older, the hard life making her age much more rapidly than a lady of a more wealthy birth. She, in her turn, obviously saw that he was indeed going to remain as he was, youthful, energetic, and full of vigor. Yet she said nothing. Sometimes he forgot the gulf between them, and arranged long walks into the hills, impatient to reach the summit of this or that place, only to find her dragging herself along with laboured breathing, way behind him. It was at these times he felt sad for them both. One day, when her hair had turned white and her face had begun to crease into a leathery appearance, he found her lying by the milk bucket in the stall. He carried her frail body into the Croft and laid it on the bed he had fashioned for them both with his own hands. She smiled up at him and stroked his hair, the way a mother would do to a son. "Ah, my bonny lad," she said. "You will not grieve too much for your Heather, promise?" He hugged her to him. "Lassie, lassie," he cried, weeping into her bosom. "Don't leave me so soon. I'm afraid. I need you here." She pushed him from her sagging breasts and said, "Look at me. I'm an old woman. You're still in your prime, Connor MacLeod. I don't want to live any more. We've had our time together, and wonderful it was. Don't spoil it with regret. God gave us each other. You were his gift to me. Now I have to go and thank him, for I am as grateful as a woman should be, that has known real love. You'll get better, you'll see. I'll care for you real well. You'll get better, lassie." She took his head in her hands. "No, I must go, don't you see? It has to happen sometimes. I can't stay here forever. I'm not like you. I'll wait for you, Connor, my lad. We'll see each other again. 1,000, 10,000 years is but a moment in the place that I am going. Don't forget me, Connor MacLeod. There will be other women." "Never!" he cried fiercely. "There will be other women, and I can't tell you a lie. I'm jealous of them already. But as long as I stay in some corner of your heart, I'll not let that jealousy turn to poison. I'm as weak as any other woman, Connor. I want my own to be my own. So don't you forget your Heather, though you live until the sun itself dies." He touched her cheek. Her voice became very weak as she said, You stayed with your Heather, though she became an old woman." "Not so old. I love you now as much as on the first day we met." "And I love you." She was fading fast now. She said, "I don't want to die. I want to stay with you." "I want that too." "Do something for me, Connor." "What, my bonny?" "In the years to come, will you light a candle? Remember me on my birthday." Love, I will." "I wanted to have your children." She had suddenly turned very pale, and Connor climbed onto the bed with her and lay by her side. Hold my hand, Connor. Hold it tightly." He did so, pressing his cheek against hers, and soon the warmth began to go out of her. He stayed there until the night came, and then he went out to the ruined tower and stood by the grave of Ramirez. "Well, old friend," he said, "I think I envy you now. I'm putting my Heather in here beside you, so you can look after her for me." His voice grew a little impassioned. "You look after her for me, you hear, peacock?" Then he went and got a spade and dug a grave next to that of the Spaniards. The rest of the night, by the light of an oil lamp, he fashioned a coffin from pine wood, into which he placed the corpse. Finally, he chipped a cross from one of the stones of the tower and laid it across both graves. "You can share it between you," he said. "I'll not mind you sharing." For the next 2 years, he worked around the Croft, then, tiring of the life, decided to see more of the world. He went down to Edinburgh and stayed there 10 years, learning to read and write and generally gathering knowledge to himself. Then he moved on to London. Wherever he went, he found he had to move on every few years, because newly made friends began to look sideways at him and comment on his ability to remain youthful. There were wars, always wars, in which he fought and of which he wearied, though he tried to choose the side of right. Often he could not see the proper cause and tried to stay out of the bloodshed as much as he was able. There were other women too, but he held back on any strong emotion. He chose those he knew would tire of him early and leave him for some other young man. In the 18th century, he began to travel more widely, visiting the Far East and experiencing other cultures. Twice he met up with people like himself. On one of those occasions, he had to fight and decapitate his opponent with the samurai sword left by Ramirez in the weeds below the tower. Many times he wished he were a normal man, and unable to stop the aging process, which was the lot of normal men. He did not want to die, but he did not always want to live.